The federal government is calling it a positive development in the ongoing showdown between police and protesters. The BC RCMP is offering to withdraw their officers from Wet'suwet'en territory. They moved into the area more than 2 weeks ago to enforce a court injunction against pipeline opponents, which is what sparked solidarity protests and rail blockades that are now starting to cripple the economy. The latest of those blockades is outside Montreal in Saint-Lambert, Quebec. This is a live shot of the scene. CN Rail has obtained an injunction to clear the tracks, and Quebec Premier François Legault says police will enforce that injunction and dismantle the blockade. We're watching for their arrival right now. We also have our eyes on the Tyendinaga blockade near Belleville, Ontario, which prompted commuter and freight train shutdowns across the country. Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs are actually on their way from BC to that site to thank their supporters. We're going to check in with Olivia Stefanovic, who's been on site since last week, of course, monitoring the situation. Meanwhile, the country's provincial premiers are standing by their phones waiting for a conference call with the Prime Minister that is slated to start in exactly 1 hour. Some of those premiers have called for the use of force to remove barricades, but now that the RCMP have offered to leave their station in BC, will trains get moving again? Bill Blair is the Minister of Public Safety. He joins us now. Hi, Minister Blair.
Hi, Bashi.
Thanks very much for coming in. I want to start off by asking you about the RCMP's sort of letter signaling that they are willing to move positions in the BC Wet'suwet'en territory. Has that actually happened?
Well, a letter was sent by the Deputy Commissioner, the commander of the RCMP in British Columbia, Deputy Commissioner Strachan. She sent a letter last night to the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs. They're aware of the letter. My understanding is that they have in fact received it. The RCMP have been on that site. Well, first of all, they are already deployed there. The police have jurisdiction in that area, but they've been working over the last couple of months in that area. They've been working very closely with those hereditary chiefs and with that community to effect an injunction that's been in place. You know, they were very careful, took their time, brought it into effect. There was some enforcement that took place around the enforcement of that injunction. They made arrests, but over the past several weeks, things have really calmed down there quite a bit, and the road is open. And the Deputy Commissioner has determined that their posture, they don't need to be physically in a building on the roadway itself, and so they're redeploying their officers just to the end of the road in the town around town of Houston. They're quite prepared to begin that process right now, but it's also part of an ongoing dialogue with the hereditary chiefs and with that community about the best way to maintain safety on that roadway, and to allow the RCMP to do their job. But the RCMP listened. And in a very respectful dialogue, and they understand the importance of maintaining a peaceful, respectful relationship with those people, and I think they've made a very responsible decision, but in no way have they backed away from their responsibility to keep the community safe.
I just want to be clear, though, you say there's a willingness to start that process right away. And I'm asking because this is what is crucial from the perspective of the hereditary chiefs. Will that actually happen? Has it actually happened? When will it happen?
I have absolute every confidence in the Deputy Commissioner, the Commissioner of the RCMP, in the very good faith offer that they have made to begin to move those people back. It's directly in response to what those hereditary chiefs asked for. When the people went to the blockades and in support and sympathy with those hereditary chiefs, they said as a condition they wanted the police to make this decision. The police made that decision, and I think very responsibly and appropriate. And the decision the RCMP has made is based on their assessment of their responsibilities, but also the evolving conditions on the ground, and they believe that it is appropriate and safe to do so.
Was that
they've begun that process.
Sorry for interrupting. What was that decision influenced at all by the federal government?
No, and I want to be really clear on this. We do not interfere with the operations and give any direction to the RCMP in the performance of their duties. This is a discussion that has been ongoing for weeks between the Deputy Commissioner and the hereditary chiefs. She also works in consultation with the Solicitor General in the province of British Columbia under our provincial police agreement in place there. But those operational decisions are not in any way subject to political interference. And we did not make any effort to do that. But I know that...
So there were just to be clear though, there were no discussions between the federal government and the RCMP about changing the RCMP's posture in BC. Because when I asked Mark Miller a few days ago whether the government was open to considering that, he did not say no.
that we have been discussing, certainly within my ministry, a number of ways. And between myself and Minister Farnworth, we both have a responsibility here. It's a shared responsibility under the provincial agreement on different things that we could do in order to turn down the temperature there but at the same time fulfill our collective responsibilities to keep that area safe. But the operational decision made by the RCMP in this case was made completely independent and on their own, based on their assessment of their legal responsibilities and the situation on the ground. They believe this is the appropriate thing to do and the best move at this time, based on their assessment of the circumstances.
I'm just a little bit.
We gave no direction on that.
Okay, I'm just a little bit confused by the answer, because you said in those conversations with Minister Farnworth, what were there conversations about the RCMP's posture that took place at a political level? Not direction given, I take your point on that, but have there been conversations about the posture changing?
Mike Farnworth is a very hardworking guy, and they've been dealing with a difficult situation in British Columbia for several months with respect to the enforcement of that injunction, and we talked about that, and we talked about the situation that we're dealing with across the country, and there were a number of different considerations given to that thing. But Minister Farnworth and I both clearly understand that it is not appropriate, nor would we ever give operational direction or interfere with decisions of the RCMP. This was made by the Commissioner and the Deputy Commissioner based on their assessment of the situation on the ground, on their responsibilities, and the best way to keep that community safe. And at the same time, I think it's entirely consistent with what I know is the RCMP's policies, but also their values, to try to resolve these situations as non-confrontationally and as peacefully as possible.
Hereditary Chief Wose was on the show a few days ago, and he stipulated, as have other hereditary chiefs, the condition for a conversation with Minister Bennett and her provincial counterpart, Minister Fraser, is the removal of the RCMP from that site. Now that that condition appears to be on its way to being met, has the federal government received any signals or specific messages from the hereditary chiefs that they will in fact meet with Minister Bennett? Well,
the information has certainly gone to those chiefs. As you're probably aware, a number of the hereditary chiefs have traveled from their traditional territory. I believe are visiting through Toronto and Montreal to the Tyendinaga area and possibly into other Mohawk territory as well. And so they are on the road and traveling. But I know that Minister Bennett and Minister Miller have made it very clear to those hereditary chiefs and to all the people and Indigenous leaders involved in this that our ministers are available at a moment's notice to come and meet with them and to continue this dialogue. We recognize the urgency of this work. The impact of these barricades is very significant on Canadians right across the country. I will tell you, Vashi, I believe it is time for those barricades to come down. I believe through the responsible actions of the RCMP and the continued work that has gone into this, that we have created the conditions for what I hope will be a speedy resolution of the concerns that are raised.
I have to challenge you there, sir. What is speedy? I mean, their meeting here, the hereditary chiefs, my understanding is for 2 days at each stop. They have not yet signaled, at least through anything you've said or we've heard from Minister Bennett, that they are willing to meet with the federal government. Those talks haven't even commenced. Via Rail has sent 1,000 layoff notices out. CN has sent 450. What is speedy?
Actually, to be clear, we have now created the conditions that I think facilitate a speedy resolution to this issue. We are prepared to meet at a moment's notice, and we are very mindful of the urgency of the impact that this is having on Canadians right across the country. People could be laid off from their jobs, their ability to support their families.
They are being laid off. They are. They're not could be. They are, Minister.
And this is significant and urgent, and it informs the urgency of our work. We have the responsibility for the enforcement of those injunctions and the law at Tyendinaga and in other parts of the country is actually the responsibility of the police of jurisdiction. They are not impeded in any way in fulfilling that responsibility, but I know those police officers, and they want very much to resolve this peaceably because in the long term, that's what's in Canada's best interest.
Yeah, I understand that, but I'm saying there's federal jurisdiction about around the ability to move goods, or when there are Canadians who are laid off straight across the country because of this. I take your point that the conditions have been set. What I'm challenging you on is the assertion that anything speedy is possible, and I'm asking. And I know your government has been resistant to calls for a timeline, and I do understand that as well. But I think for those 1,500 Canadians approximately who are sitting there wondering when they might be back at work, they're wondering how much longer is your government willing to allow this status quo to remain?
I want to be very clear. We have said we believe the conditions for resolution of this have been met. We have said we believe it's time for those blockades to come down and get the trains moving, to get those people back to work, and to help those Canadians that are being impacted by this. We are hopeful that those who we need to talk to will come to the table to have that conversation.
What if they don't?
Well, if there is no possibility of resolving this through dialogue, then their injunctions are in place, and the police still have the authority to go in and use that authority to remove those.
Should they, if those talks never take place?
Well, again, I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to resolve this peaceably. I'm also concerned that if the police, for example, and there's no other path forward, and the police are compelled to use force, that can have a long-term impact. And we could see these types of disruptions and protests happening right across the country. I think it's in all of Canadians' interest that we do our very best. And I've heard people complain that it's not fast enough, and we'd like it to be faster. But we're working full out to try to address the concerns that have given rise to these.
Again, they're worried about their own livelihoods, right?
And I worry for them too. And my responsibility is public safety, but my government's responsibility is the quality of all Canadians' lives. And we know the impact that this is having on people. That urgency does inform everything we're doing. We're working really hard to get this resolved. I think we have reached the point where those barricades should be coming down. I hope that the people that are on those barricades and the people that are in support of them recognize that urgency that all Canadians are feeling. We believe that we have taken very significant steps to address that concern, and we're also making an ongoing commitment to dialogue to continue to work with them on reconciliation and the other concerns that they have raised. But there has to be a recognition of the impact that this is having on Canadians. We've done, I think, just about everything we can do to help resolve this. And although I very much would like to avoid having the police to enforce that injunction, I suspect the police would like to avoid having to do that as well. But that is always an option available under the authority of the provincial jurisdictions responsible. And so, we've also heard from the premiers, and they're anxious that this begin. We're not in any way impeding the provincial authorities' ability to enforce those injunctions. But at the same time, I think everybody across the country is hopeful that we can resolve this peaceably.
All right, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you, Minister. Appreciate your time as always.
Thank you.
These are opportunities to come to a peaceful resolution, which is what we've always aimed for from the beginning. There are steps to get there. The step that was made by the BC RCMP was significant. It reflects the professionalism of the police forces across the country. It is something we respect.
To offer concessions to a group of people who are breaking the law, who are ignoring the elected representatives of the Wet'suwet'en First Nations and the expressed will of the First Nations themselves, I don't see how that's progress. I don't see how that has led to any barricade being taken down.
A positive step in the right direction or a concession made to lawbreakers? Politicians are divided over the BC RCMP's offer today to withdraw from the Wet'suwet'en territory. The federal government is now, quote, hopeful protesters in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs will remove their rail blockades, but that has yet to happen. Pam Damoff is Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous Services. Dan Albus is the Conservatives' employment critic. And Leah Gazan, next to him, is a Manitoba NDP MP. They're all joining us from the House of Commons foyer. Hi to all three of you. Thanks for making time for us.
Thank you for having me.
Normally in these panels, I would start with the government, but because we just came out of an interview with Minister Blair, I'm going to start with the opposition. Mr. Albus, I want to begin with you. Your party has been demanding that the government invoke the RCMP Act, or under the RCMP Act, send in extra enforcement to dismantle the blockades. Now that the RCMP in BC have announced that they're going to change their posture, they're going to remove themselves from the Wet'suwet'en territory, do you still think that's a good idea?
Well, Vashi, we're heading to 3 weeks here, and I mean week of the response by the government and this Prime Minister. So one of the things we've been calling on is that the Minister of Public Safety, used to be known as the Solicitor General of Canada, can work with other Solicitor Generals right across the country. On a regular basis, Solicitor Generals will, either through regulation or through policy directives, give a priority list for the RCMP or for their provincial police force in order to maintain public order and consistent with the government, whether that be money laundering or dealing with serious things like tampering with rail lines. Right now, we have people that have their livelihoods on the line. We're already starting to see people are agitated on all sides. What we need to see is some leadership from the Trudeau government. And unfortunately, Vashi, That is something we still have yet to see.
So you still want the RCMP sent in, and are you not concerned, given what's happened historically, that that would just escalate things at a time when it looks like there might actually, or there could actually be some progress?
Well, let's just hold back here. General policy application gives priorities. It's up to the RCMP to uphold the law as peace officers. RCMP and other police forces have made great strides to work with First Nations, but they also need to show that there is the force of law. We already see some people that are agitated by these protests going in and taking them down. That causes problems. We see radical protesters outside the Premier of British Columbia's home claiming that they can do a citizen's arrest. Vashi, we need to have police forces coordinated. We need to make sure that people understand that this situation will not be permitted to go on indefinitely so that we can restore law and order. That's not the case. That's why we need this Prime Minister to be working with his provincial counterparts. That's why Premier Legault in Quebec has been calling upon there to be more deadlines. We have seen zero from the government in terms of deadlines, in terms of action plans. We hear a lot of talk, unfortunately. Again, I want to see everyone get along, but sometimes we need people to stand for what is right, and that includes the rule of law and rights for everyone.
Ms. Gazan, I want to ask you about something that the leader of your party, Mr. Singh, said today in the House of Commons. He was putting forth to the government, why isn't it the Prime Minister who is going to meet with hereditary chiefs? We had Premier Horgan holding a press conference today, asked the same question. Why aren't you individually going? And he said, the only way I'm going to do that is if there's going to be a positive outcome. Are you not sort of undermining, is your party not undermining the argument being put forth by Premier Horgan, who happens to be an NDP Premier?
Well, look, I mean, there's no question that there's this crosses different jurisdictions, but I have to say our party has, from the start, had a couple of very clear steps. One, that the RCMP need to stand down. That's a really positive step. But the hereditary chiefs have asked to meet with Prime Minister Trudeau, a Prime Minister who said his most important relationship was the nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous people. Where is he? And the fact that this has gotten to the point it is really demonstrates a lack of leadership from Trudeau to allow it to get this far. And he's still not around. I know that they're sending Minister Caroline Bennett. They didn't ask to meet with Minister Caroline Bennett. They asked to meet with Justin Trudeau. And I think that if he can be all over the world, he can certainly make time to meet with the hereditary chiefs of the Wet'suwet'en territory in the middle of a national crisis.
Yeah, not to take away, just a quick follow-up for you, Ms. Gazan, not to take away from the points being put forth by the hereditary chiefs, but what kind of message or precedent does it ultimately set if those who set up blockades and protest in the manner that they have been, which they're entitled to a certain degree, but obviously, the company has gotten injunctions, and the CNN has gotten injunctions. What kind of message does it send if that then forces a meeting with the Prime Minister? If he acquiesces, does that not send the wrong message?
Well, listen, I mean, I really feel for workers throughout this country. CN workers, VIA workers, I take the train myself, that are being impacted by it, no question. This is wrong. Businesses, all the things that we've brought out in the House of Commons. But we also have to remember that this is a failure of over 150 years of consecutive Liberal and Conservative governments failing to deal with long-standing land disputes. Certainly that's, the Wet'suwet'en peoples have been waiting at the table for over a decade. Ganasatawge, where we saw the Oka crisis, 300 years. They've been waiting at the table. So this isn't just random events that have popped up. We've seen...
So is the Premier of BC wrong?
Well...
Should he be meeting too?
Well, what I'm saying is that I think all authorities involved in this need to meet at the table. They need to meet at the table in the spirit of reconciliation, all the authorities involved. And that includes all leadership with hereditary chiefs.
Ms. Demoff, what do you say to the request that the Prime Minister be the one to lead the meetings if they should happen with the hereditary chiefs?
Well, I think the Prime Minister is leading a team of people who have been working nonstop on this. You can't discount the value of having someone like Minister Miller meet as he did on Saturday, or offering for Minister Bennett, who has so many years of public service and experience. It's a team that's working on this. Minister Blair, you had on the program earlier, Minister Garneau, all of Cabinet, quite frankly, all of caucus is seized with trying to find a peaceful, long-lasting solution.
Except it's days, 15 days into it now, and I wonder at what point does it reach the level where, okay, the Prime Minister needs to go in?
Well, it has been 15 days, and people are hurting. There are Indigenous
1,500 people have, I understand that, but 1,500 people have received layoff notices.
Yeah, I mean, there's workers who are hurting, their businesses, but there are Indigenous people who are hurting as well, who haven't felt part of this country for many, many years. And what we are trying to do is open dialogue and establish a lasting and sustainable solution to this problem. Sending in police forces to dismantle blockades or tweeting about vigilantes and condoning vigilante action does not reach a solution.
My question is what Ms. Gazan raised, and that is it if you're looking for that long-lasting permanent solution and looking to recognize the injustices that those who are protesting have faced, why isn't it the Prime Minister delivering that message?
Well, the Prime Minister is leading the team, Vashi.
But he's not there. I mean, there's no offer to meet with the hereditary chiefs.
Well, and quite frankly, the invitation has to come from the hereditary chiefs for a meeting. But listen, he's leading the team that is doing this work. To your point, I mean, you have said the Premier doesn't want to meet. I think we can't just focus on the Prime Minister being the one person who can solve this problem. We need a whole of government approach to dealing with what's going on. I think the right people are at the table right now at this time, and the Prime Minister is involved. He's being briefed. He's calling meetings. I understand he's speaking to the premiers this evening.
He is, yeah. 6 o'clock.
It's to say that he's not involved or showing leadership really diminishes what a leader does, and that's engage his team, engage everyone involved to make sure that we can come up with a solution.
Mr. Albus, what do you think about that?
Well, I think one thing we've left out of this discussion is the elected people of the Wet'suwet'en Nation have already said that they support this. The 20 First Nations have said that this is part of their economic aspirations for their people. And Reconciliation Canada's Conservatives believe is a major part of that, is to make sure that those aspirations can be met so that people don't continue to live in poverty. Unfortunately, both the Liberal approach of inaction and only listening to one side of the coin here, and to the NDP playing on the other side and encouraging and empowering actually some of the radical behavior we've seen, like again, staking out in front of a premier's house, frightening his wife. That is not the way we do things in a country under the rule of law.
Aren't you picking sides too, though? Isn't your party picking sides as well?
Well, we're standing by the elected representatives. Like Vashi,
I take your point on the elected stuff, but it's not that black and white, right? It's the system of elected band councils happened from the Indian Act. There's a lot of there's a lot behind that historically.
Well, but so far we've talked about again the hereditary chiefs, but we also need to talk about the elected chiefs and the people themselves that do see this program as important. And you know what? I came as a city councillor to being an MP, and it would be ridiculous to say that we would need to have 100% of support for any initiative before it goes forward. We live in a democracy, and that means listening to all sides. That means meeting with people, but it also means within a rule of law, and that means that there has to be due process. This project, Vashi, has spent 10 years going through the Indigenous consultations required, going through the scientific technical assessments, and going through a regulatory process. If this project can't go forward, Vashi, then what ones can?
What's interesting, Ms. Gazan, and I'm wondering if you think Mr. Halbus has a point, is that that's actually nearly word for word the argument that I've heard put forth by Premier Horgan, an NDP premier in BC.
For sure.
Does he have do they have a point?
No, well, what I've been saying, and certainly supported here, is that, we have Section 35, that protects Aboriginal rights and title. The rights of the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs have been affirmed under Section 35 in the Delgamuukw case. We've been very clear about our position on that. We stay clear on our position about that. And like I've said before.
What does that mean? I mean, does that mean that you think that everything should be stopped regardless of the process that Coastal GasLink went through?
I think that we have a constitution. Part of our constitution includes Section 35. That includes Aboriginal rights and title. And
they have title, but part of that decision also stipulated that there had to be negotiations with the Crown, negotiations that have not taken place. And I'm not blaming that that on one party or the other, but they haven't.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is that you can't respect and fight for the rights of people to say yes. You also have to honor the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples. That's the right to say yes, no, or yes with conditions. Clearly, there's issues here. I'm glad that the RCMP are standing down, that we're now at a point where we're taking a pause to figure out a way forward. Having RCMP, violent interaction, we know what happens. Ipperwash, Oka. It is not a peaceful ending, and it's not a swift ending to what we're experiencing, including people that are impacted by the blockades. It's a way of escalation. I think it's unfortunate that there's such divisive language being used here. Our party has been very clear that going forward, Trudeau needs to go. I'm glad the RCMP is standing down, and we need a mediator to help facilitate dialogue.
Okay, I have just time for a very quick final word to Ms. Demoff.
Well, I think, you know, I've been saying people keep talking about us not taking action, and I'm frustrated that people don't consider dialogue taking action. I'm
Do you understand why the concern is there, though, given the economic impact of the past 15 days?
Absolutely do, but for some reason, trying to get people to the table and talking to each other is not considered a way of taking action on the very serious issues that are happening.
They're not at the table. The hereditary chiefs are not at the table with your government.
Well, but you know, that doesn't mean that you don't try and have conversations with them, though, Vashi.
Fair point, yeah.
Right, and I don't. People seem to think this is a simple solution to a very, very, very complex problem. You brought up a number of issues, as have my colleagues. This is affecting the economy. This is impacting Canadians, and it's impacting Indigenous peoples. And everyone thinks that there's a magic wand that we can wave to fix this, and it's complex. It requires patience. It requires empathy, and I truly hope that we can come to a solution quickly, so that we can get things moving and give Indigenous peoples the opportunity to be part of a conversation in this country.
Okay, I have to leave it there. I'm out of time, but thank you very much to all three of you for your time this evening. Pam Demoff, Dan Albus, and Leah Gazan.
Communications has to be two-way, and I think our communications efforts have been public record.
So there hasn't been a response to the second letter?
I believe that the appropriate course is to have Minister Fraser and Minister Bennett, on behalf of the two orders of government, start that discussion. I don't believe that I have any more magic in my pocket than Minister Fraser does.
Over the last week, federal and BC ministers have sent 2 letters to Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs requesting a meeting to resolve the ongoing land rights dispute. According to both levels of government, there has been no response, but they're ready and waiting. Meanwhile, the RCMP and BC are now offering to leave Wet'suwet'en territory in the hopes of de-escalating the situation. If the hereditary chiefs do come to the table, what's the plan? Scott Fraser is BC's Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation. He joins us now from Victoria. Hi, Minister. Thanks for coming back on. Nice to see you again.
Hi, Vashi. My pleasure.
Minister Fraser, let me start off with the question about the RCMP and where that stands. I had asked Minister Blair off the top of the show, and he didn't have a specific answer, but they've offered to leave. Has the process actually begun for the RCMP's withdrawal from the territory?
So I'm in Victoria right now, so I haven't been in the territory of late, but my understanding is they're working on the move right now, if it hasn't already occurred.
Was your government a part of the discussion at all, or did it give any direction to the RCMP to withdraw from the area?
No, as I stated before, us politicians do not have any role to direct the RCMP. I understand they've heard I think the demands from the hereditary chiefs. I know Chief Wass just earlier, a number of days ago, suggested that they wouldn't be interested in talks with either level of government if the RCMP were still in place. I'm assuming that maybe that message was heard by the RCMP, and they reanalyzed. My understanding is they reanalyzed their operational situation in the territory and believe that they could affect what they need to do with the removal of the camps still occurring. So that would be a good sign, because that was certainly the condition that Chief Wass laid down for actually having a face-to-face meeting with Minister Bennett and myself.
He did. Do you think it was the right decision by the RCMP?
I don't have any handle on the operational situation with the RCMP. I trust that they've done the right approach here, and for us, it certainly opens the door for those conversations. So I'm pleased.
When you say it opens the door, have you received any positive signals since the RCMP announced they'd be doing so that a meeting will happen with hereditary chiefs?
I haven't got any. No, nothing back from the two letters. The first one was sent on Sunday. The second one yesterday morning. But have not received anything back. I mean, most of the information we're getting, unfortunately, is through the press, comments that are made in the press, on social media. My opinion, that's not the way to go. We need to, dialogue is the way through this.
Why is there no communication between your government and the hereditary chiefs?
Well, we've made every effort. I know Minister Bennett has also, but I can't speak for the office of Wet'suwet'en.
And so where does that leave things? Because I think there are a number of people watching who are saying, okay, the RCMP have made this decision. You're right, Chief Wose was explicit. That's the condition under which, needs to be, that's what needs to happen in order for a discussion to take place. But there's no sign that a discussion even will take place. So how can Canadians kind of have any confidence and British Columbians that the situation will change?
Well, we're all in new ground here. My bag is packed, Vashi. It has been for weeks, and I'm ready to go at the drop of a hat. I'll walk away from any meeting and head up north. That's the offer we can make. I know Minister Bennett's made a similar offer, and we've done so jointly. So, we're breaking down silos between government. This is a good time, I think, to de-escalate. A number of leaders, Indigenous leaders, have already stated that publicly, that, the message has been told, and it's time to get to the table. We initiated a table at the province with the Office of Wet'suwet'en back in April of last year to deal exactly with the issues around rights and title. And to try to avert any sort of situation like this, and to try to respect and recognize the rights and title of the Wet'suwet'en people. That work has to happen within the Wet'suwet'en people, and so far it has not.
On January 10th, hereditary chiefs sent a letter to both BC Premier, your Premier, Premier Horgan, as well as Prime Minister Trudeau, requesting a meeting. Neither leader has actually individually met with them. Is that a mistake?
I don't believe so. I've been given the mandate 2.5 years ago. We've been in government. Premier Horgan named me as the member of Executive Council responsible for Indigenous relations and reconciliation. That's been my job. That's what I do. That's my role in the cabinet, in the provincial cabinet. So it is my job. He has, if it were an education issue in a different situation, I'm sure the Minister of Education would be the lead on that. Same thing at the federal level, I would suggest, for Minister Bennett. That's her role, and she and I have worked together before. So no, this is totally appropriate.
But with respect, and not to take away from your role at all, but there are nearly 1,500 Canadians right now, because of the current situation, who have or are about to receive a layoff notice. And I'm just wondering, is there a point at which, given that you have a role and that Minister Bennett has a role, it becomes time for the leaders of both the province and the country to actually conduct these meetings? Otherwise, if they're not responding to you and Minister Bennett, does something need to change?
Well, I guess there could be an argument for that, but again, I think the letters stated that to both the Premier and to the Prime Minister that themselves or a senior representative.
But they're clearly saying now they want the Premier and the Prime Minister. They've said it in multiple interviews.
Okay, and again, we don't have, I have no correspondence. I hate working through the media to get communications on this. So we're working with what we know. We have our position in writing, hoping for something back from not just one chief or another chief, but from the Office of Wet'suwet'en, and that's what governance is about. And there are differing opinions within the Wet'suwet'en people on this issue, significantly differing opinions on how governance should occur and how that's being represented. So there is work to do at home here. I think the chiefs need to address that with the elected chiefs and council, with their community members, and we've offered to help assist that going back to April, as I mentioned, and we've helped resource that, and it has. So far, it has not been. It has not led to a solution. I'm afraid.
Very quickly before I let you go, Minister, if the hereditary chiefs do end up saying that they would prefer, as they have in the past, the route of the pipeline to be altered. And if doing so would allay their objection to the construction of the pipeline, should Coastal GasLink change the route?
No, I can't speak for Coastal GasLink. This is a proponent-driven process. They have applied for application to do this. They've received those all their permits. The
province could stipulate, though, a route change if necessary.
Well, our 25 hours of meetings that we did have several weeks ago with the Office of Wet'suwet'en, that issue was not raised. So again, we have to sit down and talk about these things. You and I are talking about these as from both sides of it, but I have not. That didn't occur during any of my conversations with the Office of Wet'suwet'en. So again, let's have those conversations. Let's get to the table and see what our options are.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time, Minister Fraser. Appreciate it. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.